Welcome back to the channel. Today, Abu Klea. So, this is from the movie Khartoum. It's not good. The movie Khartoum, which is supposed to be about the period that I really enjoy, the bit that I call the Anglo-Mahdist War, sort of 1884 to 85. Gordon in Khartoum, which things are named after, Battle of Abu Klea, all these other battles that go on. I've actually got, I think, 2 videos on the Mahdist, this part of the Mahdist War, this particular Mahdist War. The Mahdi was an Islamic prophet. Mahdi means expected one, like an Islamic prophet who basically had a force of jihadists, not in the beheading and putting it on live leak sense, but in the sort of fanatical sense. And so the Mahdi had his jihadists, and they took over the Sudan, which was part of Egypt. And Egypt was basically owned by the British because the Egyptians had got themselves into a staggering amount of debt, and the British had bailed them out because the Egyptians threatened to cut off the Suez unless the British gave them money. So the Mahdist War is actually a pretty safe colonial war if you ever want to get into colonial wargaming and you're a bit standoffish, because the Mahdists, basically, the British really don't want to be there. The enemies they're fighting are the same enemies that are still being fought today, to be honest. So in places like Syria and Afghanistan, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's actually a really good thing. The British they don't want to be there. They're not trying to conquer territory. They end up leaving and then coming back, and part of the reason they come back is to eliminate slavery, because the Sudan just erupts into full-on slavery, which is what happens when your 2IC is one of the biggest slave traders in the region, or was before the British had taken away his industry. Anyway, Abu Klea is, I've done another video on it, essentially the Camel Corps, which is this, it's almost like a recon element unit that's basically, they cut across the desert to try and get to Gordon in Khartoum. They meet the enemy at Abu Klea. They have a 10-minute fight. They form a square. They basically just slaughter the Mahdists. The Mahdists get in the square at one point, but they deal with it. Again, it's a 10-minute fight. A Gardner gun comes out, which is sort of like a Gatling gun, but it's like a pipe organ type thing. A Victorian hero dies, Frederick Burnaby. A VC is given out to a gunner who saves the officer's life with a trail spike. Really, it's actually really interesting. You should watch my video on it anyway, or a video on it. But anyway, let's have a look at how they've done Abu Klea, and how it's all not only wrong, but if you had done it this way, you would have been utterly slaughtered. So, apologies for the quality. This is the best I could find on YouTube. The uniforms are actually quite good. The uniforms are they're as good as you would expect. The grey tunic is, all my miniatures for the Sudan are painted in the grey. That was the home service tunic. So that was what the British had come up with, this fantastic idea that if you had grey troops in this sort of like pale grey colour, that they would just disappear when you looked at them on the horizon in a desert. If they had asked, I don't know, the Confederate Army or who else was wearing grey, the Prussians had a go at wearing grey. The grey was, it was a comic colour. They would have found out that grey actually makes you stand out quite a lot on a big desert battlefield, and it turns out that khaki is a much better colour. And thankfully, the British Army in India was already using khaki, so this is the last war where the British actually fight. I believe a single battle is fought in redcoats, but almost all this war is fought in khaki and in the home service grey. They did something quite similar to what the Australians would do in the Second World War. When they came across from the desert, the Australians dyed their clothes just with dye, green dye, just in the field. And some of these guys would actually dye their clothes khaki in the field. The bullets they were using were modified dum-dums. A dum-dum is basically a hollow point, but in a rifle. And they're freaking man-stoppers, man. Dum-dums were made super illegal. In the Boer War, if a Boer got caught with a dum-dum, just death instantly. They're essentially, the old saying is small hole in, big hole out. So, that's not how expanding bullets work. But a lot of the ammunition was actually just made. A dum-dum is a place in India. It's not a funny name or something. It's literally just the place where they were made. A lot of the dum-dums for the Sudan were actually made by just getting a bullet, and some armourer somewhere would just cut the tip off it and modified a little bit, and so there were some problems with them. Anyway, it's a minute clip. I've got to stretch it out to at least 10 because I don't want to put out little tiny junk content. Anyway, long junk content's much better. Nothing wrong so far. The British didn't like to ride side saddle with the camel like that. They actually had a sort of setup with, I'll put a Perry miniature thing up here. It's quite good to show you that. They had this sort of like saddle setup where they would sit back a little with their legs in stirrups. This is the Arabic way of riding camels. And the helmets would have been dyed with tea to be khaki as well, because that giant white helmet just stands out so much. So almost always the helmets were dyed with just with old tea or something like that. You'd actually soak a pith helmet in water and put it on your head, and that was the most common way that they were worn, because the water would just sort of keep you cool during the day. They're actually quite good for desert stuff. These are meant to be the leading officers. They got sabers. They actually ran into the Mahdists the day before, and they'd actually made a camp with proper defenses and everything the night before, so they didn't just stumble into one another. That's a good order to give. What they do next is possibly the dumbest thing you could do, but that order is perfectly fine. The Mahdists, almost all the Mahdists actually had horses, or they would have had access to horses. Fighting on foot was the main thing they did, but most Mahdists would have had access to some kind of a horse, or they would have been able to have been loaned a horse at some point. The way the Mahdists carry their sword is, still the way carried in the Sudan today, is a single strap over the shoulder, like a purse or a handbag, but it's a sword, and the swords are actually... I can't remember the name, but they're basically cruciform Crusader-style swords. Their blades, I believe, were made in Germany. Somehow they got them back to the Sudan. But yeah, cavalry is perfectly valid. Most of the army at Abu Klea was infantry, though. Okay, so the uniform that they're wearing has to do with the Mahdi's declaration that basically every man should wear one piece of clothing until the Sudan was liberated, or until his prophecy had become true. Or it was essentially a religious statement of poverty, and if you're wearing the same uniform, same clothing day after day after day, it gets holes and tears. And so what the poor would do is they couldn't afford nice bright white cloth anymore, so they would actually get just a scrap of bread, sew a bit of red patching on, sew a blue patch here and a yellow patch over there. And eventually this became, these are later uniforms. The earlier ones would have just been patched all over. But by the sort of little bit after this period, the patching became sort of this symbol of poverty, that this sort of symbol of the everyman type thing. And officers ended up putting regular squares all over their clothing, or big triangles and things like that. And it eventually became the fashion to decorate this piece of clothing that you were wearing with all different types of colours to imitate this early practice of on-the-spot patching. The swords seem fine. The problem's with the British, not the Mahdists. Can you see the problem yet? Can you see the problem? This is a giant problem. This is an enormous problem because camels don't like guns fired above their heads. They don't really like horses just barreling into them. They don't like spears being thrown at them. They don't like death, and camels would freak out if you did this to them. What actually happened at Abu Klea was they dismounted, fixed bayonets, made a square, and put the camels inside the square, because if they had the camels where they are here, the Mahdists could have just shot them all, because the Mahdists had captured a ton of Remington rifles, which are the easiest rifles to use for someone who's incompetent and inexperienced and illiterate and has no idea what a gun is. You can't screw up a Remington rolling block. You just cannot. It will not shoot if you don't have it set up right. So putting the camels on the outside would have been a huge problem, a huge mistake. They would have been a total disaster. The camels would have stampeded probably, and the British would have been in a lot of trouble. So yes, this camels as a barricade, not even sure why they do it, because the horses can just jump over them anyway. So it's not even a very practical thing to do, let alone realistic. The martinis are fine. That's a Remington rolling block. That's a Remington? Why does this man have a Remington? Or some other kind of rolling block? A rolling block is essentially pull one back and then you pull the second and then load a cartridge, and it's complicated, but it's not actually. It's very simple, but it's complicated to explain without actually having one. So yeah, that should be a martini, not a rolling block. I don't know why he has that. I don't know how he would get that either. That's like one of the guys on SitRep were talking about having a Tommy gun in Vietnam, and it's like, where are you going to get the ammunition? I have no idea where he would have got that from, or how he's keeping himself supplied with ammunition, or what quartermaster is letting him do that, especially since these are the Guard. These are the one of the household cavalry regiments. I don't know why he would be allowed to have that, or why he would want it either. The Martini is a much superior rifle. No bayonets either. I'm not saying, maybe bayonets for safety reasons they didn't want to use them, but okay, so we're not going to see. Okay, we're 0 bayonets, because apparently they didn't. I don't know. That's probably a safety issue, but there are movies made in the. I think it's made in the 60s. There are movies made in this time period with bayonets. They don't give a crap. Apparently, a lot of the horses used in this actually were killed too. They were not. This was not a safe set, so I have no idea why they weren't using them. Yeah, that's not accurate at all. The Martis didn't break through the square by jumping over it. They broke through the square because part of the square opened up to let the Gardner gun out. Gardner gun then jammed. By the time they got it back in, some Martis had already got in. So it's nothing like this whatsoever. This is unrecognizable. And you see the camels stampeding off, because that's what camels do. So that was the Battle of Abu Klea from the movie Khartoum. Let me know if you'd like me to review any other historical movies. Leave them in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching, and have a wonderful day.